Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming this early to see a psychiatrist. I'm sure now you can proudly say that you have seen one. I'm sure all of you will agree that relationships are important. They are helpful for our well-being and our joy. And we learned this in a difficult way during the pandemic. Every relationship is very, very important, whether it's with a family, with our friends, or our lover. And for those of you who have been in love, will know that it's an indescribable, unparalleled experience. When you're in love, you are lost in the thoughts of your lover, even obsess about them to some extent. And that's okay. But what is also very common is to have doubt, insecurity, and uncertainty. I think to some extent that is required so that you can be on your toes, be attentive to your lover, and also invest in the relationship, which is usually very dynamic in nature and requires your consistent input. I want you to imagine this for a minute. Imagine you are now in love with somebody. You are with somebody you always wanted to be with. But there is a nagging thoughts in your head, constantly doubting about your feelings towards your partner's feelings towards you, and the rightness of the relationship. Even obsessing on whether you are stuck in the wrong relationship. Constantly questioning whether she is the right one for me, whether I'm stuck in the wrong relationship, whether she loves me enough, do we look good together? You start obsessing on the various aspects of your partner, her appearance, her features, her manner, constantly evaluating whether the way she talks to you means that she loves you or not loves you. When she looks away, does it mean that she's not interested in you? Imagine being plagued by these thoughts and consumed by them day in and day out for hours on end each day. Imagine being stuck in a relentless cycle of doubt and uncertainty, even when things are going all right, even when you have been assured that things are going well and that you are in love and the partner loves you. That is the reality of those we see with people with relationship obsessive-compulsive disorder. Now you would start to think that does such a disorder at all exist? Or is this absolutely a new condition? You might have heard of people being obsessed in relationships, even like it to some extent when your partner is obsessing about you. In 25 years of my clinical practice, I have seen a wide range of emotional and psychological problems. Many of them stem from relationship issues. And I can tell you with confidence that most of the relationship issues are directly related to communication problems. So that means that the communication makes it the foremost pillar of relationship, with trust, respect, and love being the other three pillars. So for example, if you have a very open, honest, and a very consistent communication, then it makes for a very robust and committed relationship. Conversely, if you have an inconsistent communication with your partner, then that means you're going to have a confused and conflicted relationship. What we also see in the clinical practice is those with obsessive thinking and obsessive spectrum. And I think that becomes quite difficult to manage because people who present with obsession, which is over and above and excessive, have got so frustrated that they are not able to contain their thoughts, and they present with an impatience to be resolved immediately. When we look at the disorders, we'd like to look at obsessive-compulsive spectrum. And I call it spectrum because they're a group of disorders brought together where they have common features like preoccupation, obsessions, and intrusive thinking. And there are other disorders in the spectrum apart from OCD, which includes body dysmorphia, which you might know of, hypochondriasis, and impulse control disorders. But looking at the spectrum makes it easy, but looking at problems as a continuum makes it even easier because nothing exists on its own. They always exist on a continuum. For example, with obsessive spectrum, you look at obsession on one end and compulsion or obsessive-compulsive disorder on the other end. So looking at obsession, why does it have such negative connotations? We all have experienced obsessive thinking and obsessions in our lifetime. Take, for example, we have been obsessed with our work, our routine, our things, and our relationships. We are obsessed about everything. You'd agree that we are obsessed with ourselves, driven by social media related perfectionism and narcissism. I would think that we are in a pandemic of obsessive and overthinking. Why? Because we are bombarded with information, we are constantly engaged with everything and everyone at all given times. So that is going to contribute to a continuous flow of thought, which is never going to stop. And that is something that we see all the time in practice, where we are in a hyper alert and hyper engaged, always thinking mode. Obsession has got negative connotations because it is associated with compulsions and unhealthy fixations. But it is a normal human experience. It becomes a problem when it becomes an excessive. That way to differentiate between healthy and unhealthy obsession is this. The unhealthy obsessions are intrusive, they're distressing, and they're difficult to get rid of. And that's where OCD comes in. OCD entails an unhealthy obsessions. Remember, we all might have obsessive thinking, but not all of them will have obsessive-compulsive disorder. So what is it? Obsessive-compulsive disorder is an anxiety disorder, a mental health condition which is seen in about 2% of the population. So the good news is that 98% of people are not going to have OCD. So that is good. But we all have obsessive thinking. In obsessive-compulsive disorder or OCD, you have repetitive and persistent obsessions and compulsions. And obsessions or unhealthy obsessions are what? They are repetitive by nature, they are unwanted and intrusive, they are distressing because you can't get rid of them. The individual will try and make every effort to sustain and suppress them. And they find it difficult. Compulsions are act to contain the obsessive thinking and so on. So repetitive behavior to contain obsessive disorder is what OCD is. When the obsessive thinking is targeted more towards relationships, then it becomes obsessive-compulsive disorder, or relationship obsessive-compulsive disorder. Eminent psychologists like Doron and Darby defined this as a distinctive problem within the spectrum itself, and they stated that it is more specifically related to relationship obsessive, and that it is part of the OCD disorder itself. They stated that it's not a couple problem, it's an individual problem with ramifications for relationships. So relationship OCD has profound ramifications for individuals and for partners. They defined, and we see in clinical practice, that relationship obsessive-compulsive disorder can be of two types. One can be relationship-centric, where the doubt is constantly hovering on the relationship itself, and then the other one is partner-centric, where the doubts and obsessions are really hovering around the partner's features, appearance, and behavior. What we need to understand is that ROCD also runs on a continuum, to know that having doubts and obsession doesn't make it relationship obsessive-compulsive disorder, but it is the disproportionate and distressing nature of the symptoms which make it problematic. So what are the causes? The causes of relationship obsessive-compulsive disorder and OCD are multiple in nature. We know that they could be biological, psychological, or socio-environmental in nature. Biological causes are well established. OCD are heritable. They run in families. We know that there's chemical imbalance with abnormalities in serotonin level, which contributes to OCD and anxiety symptoms. And this is also proven by the fact that antidepressants are effective in OCD because they increase the serotonin levels. Then we have psychological theories, which include cognitive theory, which suggests that obsessive-compulsive behaviors are learned behavior. So for example, fear and anxiety are acquired from operant and classical principles. They suggest that when a normal or neutral thought can start to elicit fear when they're repeatedly paired with events that cause distress. So fear and anxiety is learned, and then avoidance behavior is developed or adapted so that you can manage the anxiety. That is important when we do cognitive therapy, where it suggests that what we learn can be unlearned. Psychodynamic theory gives more interesting perspective on OCD symptoms. They suggest that OCD symptoms develop as a result, as a way of managing the anxiety which emanates from unconscious conflict and unresolved psychological issues. They go on to emphasize the importance of early childhood experiences and our formative relationships in shaping our attachment style and also shaping our personality and lifelong social interactions. So for example, if you had traumatic childhood experiences, then you're going to develop unhealthy attachment style, which in younger years will present as separation anxiety, being clingy, and so on. In later life, it will present as an obsessive tendencies in the relationship, which, as you know, will be quite damaging. So formative experiences are quite important in the way we interact, relate, and react in our life. Our earlier years guide how we deal with our relationship and people that we deal with in later lives. Understanding psychodynamic and cognitive theory help us to devise treatment plan for individuals. Then we have social learning theory, which suggests that we learn by observation. And you'll agree that the environmental influences around us influence our behavior a lot. Social media, for example, is driving the sense of perfectionism and narcissism and obsessive love with ourselves and obsession in having a perfect appearance or perfect relationship. Indian cinema produces 1,000 movies each year, and I would be surprised that if none of us are influenced heavily by it. Most of the Indian cinema presents relationship in a very delicate and sensitive manner, but many other present and romanticize unhealthy behavior, such as persistent pursuit of your loved ones, dominance and control. And the pursuit typically shown in the cinema are nagging, harassment, bullying, even stalking until your love interest accepts and agrees. It is somewhat seems to have been completely normalized, this behavior, and is also completely accepted by the female protagonist who would participate in song and dance soon after an incident of harassment and so on. Relationship portrayals in cinema is such that it's okay to do everything in your power to pursue your love and sustain your love. And presentation of toxic masculinity in recent movies is furthering the obsessive tendencies, setting unrealistic expectations, and also having a distorted perception of love, of dominance, and of control. So that is not going to do with in most of our relationships. We might not know the exact causes of obsessive-compulsive disorder or ROCD. Theories try to explain that. But we do know that they cause significant amount of problems in relationship. So what are the problems? Data very clearly suggests that 85% of people with OCD present or report moderate to severe impairment on their life. Nearly 75% of people report having developed other anxiety disorders other than OCD. 9 out of 10 people who have OCD suffer from other mental health disorders in their lifetime. And this is important. About 56% of people with OCD will go on to have or get diagnosed with ADHD. So this is important. We must need to know what it causes. But OCD causes a very indirect impact on relationships. For example, because of the obsessions and compulsions, one will be restricted by the obsessions, but also become restrictive, preventing the partners from doing things. So it's a very indirect impact. But in ROCD, the impact is very direct because the symptoms are focused on the relationship, and which contributes to conflict and breakdown of mental health, but also breakdown of relationships. On partners, the impact and the negative effect is unspeakable. And they will be rather confused, anxious, and unsure as to what's happening when they think things are going all right. So how do we treat it? Well, for a complex disorder like obsessive-compulsive and ROCD, we need to look at multi-pronged approach, and they should include medical, psychological, and social skills interventions. Medicinal intervention, I think, is the foremost in OCD because patients presenting have significant amount of symptoms, and we need to be able to reduce the anxiety and obsessive-compulsive symptoms in order to engage them with rational discussions, in order to engage them with psychological interventions. Medicines like antidepressants are not addictive like hypnotics and tranquilizers, so there is a lot of misconceptions around that. Medicines heavily influence people's engagement in therapy. From psychological perspective, exposure and response prevention is a very validated approach. It's a type of CBT where you educate the individual about the symptoms itself, you help them identify the triggers, and then you help them learn to resist the compulsions in a way that they manage to contain their anxiety, but also regain control of their emotions and senses. Once the person is exposed and confident with managing the compulsions, next you expose them to very triggers that trigger obsessions and compulsions, and then you help them to sustain or resist the compulsions in a systematic manner. So over time, you expose them to higher hierarchy of anxiety-provoking situations, and they become more and more confident in resisting the compulsions. This is a relearning process or a cognitive therapy where the brain is rewired and the person is taught that it's okay not to do things or act which you think is prevented by doing certain actions. It's okay that what you fear is not going to happen. We need to experience it in order to know about it. Just simply telling it doesn't work. So ERP is very validated approach to ROCD and OCD. Social skills training is very, very important in those with OCD because you are helping them to develop communication, adaptive, consistent, and timely communication makes for a committed and clear relationship where expectations are clearly understood and where concerns and anxieties and insecurities are addressed in a timely manner. So social skills training play an equal part. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that a combination of medicine, psychological therapy, and social interventions is more effective than either one alone. And of course, you might look at doing couple therapy sessions to help them have better interpersonal interactions. For someone who has a partner with obsessive tendencies, I would suggest to look for signs of obsessive features in their personality or obsessive tendencies in the relationship itself. And here you need to look for the red flags. And what are the red flags? Well, the red flags simply means that look for certain behaviors in your partner which could include consistent need for contacting. For example, somebody is texting, messaging you all the time, wanting you to call back, following you, even turning up on you all the time, making you very claustrophobic in the relationship. Look for features of manipulation, look for features of compulsion, and look for features of possessiveness. Look if the partner is ignoring their personal self-care over the relationship and also ignoring boundaries. So you need to look at the red flags, identify early features of obsessive tendencies, and speak up about it. And if it's difficult, seek help. We have psychologists and psychiatrists everywhere to take you through your confusion and your frustration. Finally, one of the things I need to say is that if you have obsessive tendencies or partner, then it is important to educate yourself, which would be a good way to start off by understanding the problem, by understanding what causes it, what are the coping mechanisms, and that will equip you to get less frustrated and support someone who might have obsessive tendencies in a relationship. Be patient, be compassionate. Every little help can take the person in the right direction or in the wrong direction. When we are in relationship, we need to see that work together and help each other. I want to finish off by saying that ROCD and OCD are complex disorders and they need an early intervention. Therefore, the recovery is better. Otherwise, the impact is very, very damaging. It is very, very important to seek help, which I think is a sign of strength, not weakness. More importantly, accepting your vulnerabilities and accepting your problems is rather courageous, and I feel it's pure courage in action. Finally, for those of you listening, if you have known anybody with obsessive tendencies, this talk is not meant to agitate anybody, but to educate and raise awareness so that you take preemptive actions and you support your partner and help them to speak up or seek help in an appropriate and early manner. Thank you so much.